Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Australian Survivor Titans versus Rebels following week 4, the last batch of episodes before the merge. And this was obviously a pretty interesting week to say the least. A lot of interesting stuff to break down, but we'll get to that more in a moment. But there are 16 players to talk about, and let's waste no more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 16, we have the first boot from this week, and here we have Charles. And obviously Charles gets massively screwed over here by this weird tribal where they essentially tried to recreate the Fraser tribal from last season, where they had this challenge in the middle of tribal and they had this weird format. And I feel like this twist is even more game breaking than the one last year, where at least last year it was essentially just an individual immunity challenge. This year, they were basically dictating how the vote was actually going to play out by limiting who can actually vote. And obviously, it played a massive role in what happened here, where obviously, had this been a normal round, Ferris' side very much was going to be on the losing side of this vote. But due to how the challenge broke down, it resulted in Ferris' side having the numbers here. And obviously, it played a massive role in why Charles went out. And I do feel bad for Charles in the sense that he was playing a somewhat decent game for a lot of it, where even though he didn't seem to be in the power position on the original Titans, he was in the majority there. And then obviously after the swap, he was part of this swing vote that was dictating a lot of the early action. And obviously he is sniped out as a way of weakening the Titans moving forward. Now realistically, I was never really seeing him as a contender to win this season, as his edit was way too quiet at the end of the day. And I feel like it's largely because of him being taken out in this fashion, where obviously we saw last season that Fraser's edit was pretty quiet up until his boot round, where they didn't want to make you feel bad that Fraser's getting screwed over by this twist. And I feel like Charles got the same treatment here, where they didn't want you to feel bad that Charles got screwed over here, even though he was, by limiting the amount of screen time that he got. So again, it kind of explains why he was as quiet as he was, but obviously he is now out of the game, which is why he's here, number 16. Now moving on to number 15, we have the other boot from this week, and here we have Kelly. And it was really only a matter of time before they decided to pull the trigger and take her out, as obviously she was a pretty massive character during the pre-merge and a pretty terrible player at that. And there was still a chance that she could have been dragged through the game, as coming to this episode, she was still part of Kirby's alliance initially, but then obviously we see what happens where Kirby's alliance was to target Raymond. Kelly doesn't like that. She makes it very open that she's turning against Kirby's alliance because they were targeting Raymond. And obviously it just results in them turning on Kelly in turn. And obviously Kelly is a pretty fun character here in the pre-merge, where she was pretty over the top. She would have all these crazy antics and she would just lay it on thick whenever she was putting on a cover for someone else. And in general, that was all pretty fun to see. Now, obviously, she's a pretty terrible player, where really the main reason she gets as far as she does is because she's kind of seen as a non-threat. And obviously with this war between Kirby and Ferris, it was just a matter of using her as a number for a bit. But even within that position, she pretty much sabotaged it, where she would go rogue. She would vote for Tobias during the Tobias tribal when it was supposed to be a tied vote. And even keeping Alex in the game is pretty bad, as Alex was one of the people gunning for her. You also have plenty of her allies just finding her pretty hard to manage, people like Eileen, for instance. And then obviously you have her boot round, where she just made it way too obvious that she was turning on Kirby, or even though it makes sense why she wouldn't want Raymond to go at that point, as obviously Raymond is one of the people she had a better relationship with. The way that she goes about it is way too combative and just makes it so that Kirby has no reason to keep her in the game any longer. And the fact that Ferris doesn't even try to pick up Kelly as a number is also pretty bad on Kelly's end, where yes, even though it's explained that Kirby was trying to make Ferris paranoid into flushing his idol, to where that explains why he doesn't really consider other options, the fact that he doesn't try to work with Kelly to counteract this is pretty bad on Kelly's end. So obviously all that's pretty bad. And in general, I feel like Kelly will go down as probably one of the worst players to come out of this season in the grand scheme of things, but obviously she is now out of the game, so she is here at number 15. And with that, there are 14 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win the game based on their edit and current game position. But at number 14, the person I believe is the least likely to win the game coming into the merge is Kitty. And obviously Kitty's been at the bottom now the last couple of weeks, and really this week was more the same for her, where she's just continuing to be invisible in the show, not really getting any content, to where Caroline has been continuously overshadowing the work that the duo has been doing together. And obviously, that's pretty bad in terms of Kitty's chances here. Not realistically from a game standpoint. They have been in a pretty solid spot for a lot of it, where obviously Kitty has been working alongside Caroline for a lot of it, or at least based off what we've seen from her, the limited screen time that we have gotten. And obviously, coming to the merge, that'll play a factor. But at the end of the day, I feel like Kitty and Caroline are kind of doomed at this point, as we are already getting set up to Valaria wanting to get revenge on Caroline and Kitty for taking out Viola. And while I feel like that's bad on Caroline, it's also bad on Kitty's end, as literally the only content we've gotten from Kitty is her like working alongside Caroline in the Middle Age Mafia. And I feel like if it comes down to it, I could see Kitty just being sniped out along the way to where obviously she's not going to win. So obviously there's not much to say about Kitty, and I feel like I have very little faith in her to actually win the game based on the way that she's been presented on the show. So because of that, I have her here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, we have another player that I feel pretty confident is not winning at this point, and here we have Jaden. Now, Jaden did get a visibility spike in episode 11, where at least we've gotten to see a bit of his approach to the game, where obviously he's been laying back, taking it easy, obviously bench pressing around camp, and all that's pretty funny. But then we kind of see that backfire by the time of the actual tribal, where we get the confessional of him before tribal, where he admits that his approach has kind of backfired on him and that he just doesn't know what's going on. And yes, while there was a lot of back and forth during this tribal, I feel like the fact that we're just seeing this acknowledgement that his strategy just isn't keeping up with the pace of the game is a pretty bad look on Jaden's end. And considering that he doesn't really get much content in many other episodes, to where he's pretty invisible in the other 2 episodes from the week, and it just makes me feel like he's not being taken that seriously in the game. Makes me feel very unconfident that he's going to win by the end of it. And it's for that reason that I have him here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, we have another person who I have largely written off at this point, and here we have Scott. And Scott was pretty invisible this week, didn't really get any content, and obviously that's pretty bad. He has been largely inconsistent in his presence during the season, where even though he's gotten some content here and there, I feel like the fact that he keeps like popping in and out of relevance just doesn't bode well for his chances. It wouldn't shock me if he's just sniped out along the way, maybe if Ferris tries to take a shot against Kirby. So obviously all that's pretty bad. And with him just not getting too much development outside that, and with him not being super relevant to what's been happening on the show, I do have to leave him here at number 12. Now moving on to number 11, we have another person who I do not think is winning at this point, and here we have Eileen. Now obviously Eileen's been a pretty interesting player to talk about here, in the sense that she is someone who has been shown being pretty active, but also someone who's kind of been ineffective in what they've been trying to do, where we see her highlighted in episode 10, where first up she does get to explain her Kelly vote from the last tribal, where she talks about wanting to remain in Kirby's good graces, which, fair enough. But then we literally see her later in the episode trying to play the middle, and that she wants to be this double agent between the Ferris side and the Kirby side. But then she gets exposed by the end of it, where due to the twist and her winning the challenge, and obviously with Ferris and Kirby being the other vote, it essentially puts her in a swing vote position at that tribal that forces her to make a decision. And while I understand her decision to take out Charles as a way of weakening the Titans moving forward, it also causes the Kirby side to not trust her that much, and even the Ferris side doesn't really have that much goodwill towards her, so really no one exactly trusts her at this point. And I feel like moving forward, Eileen is just kind of on her own from a game position, which is obviously pretty bad. And obviously with her just kind of getting middling strategic content, considering her position, I feel like it's not really being set up for a win by the end of it. Where I feel like from a pure game position, she's in a pretty bad spot with no one trusting her. And I feel like from an edit standpoint, I feel like her edit's been incredibly inconsistent as well, where I feel like she's only getting propped up at these points where she is stumbling through the game. And yes, while I'm not saying that I don't understand like why she's stumbling, it's still not a great look that she's not really getting propped up in many regards. So I feel like with her like kind of being shown as this floundering figure within the game on the show, I do have to leave her here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have someone kind of similar to Eileen, but I feel like this person is at least set up a little better within the actual game, and here we have Rihanna. And really the only reason I have Rihanna above Eileen is that she does have an idol now. She did get an idol in the last episode, which you would think would get her a little bit of safety within the game. But even beyond that, I feel like her position isn't great either. She's kind of just on the bottom right now, where obviously she needed to get the idol as a way of ensuring her safety if they go back to tribal. And I feel like she probably could have been in a lot of danger had that idol not come to play and had they just gone back to another tribal. So obviously that's not particularly great. But then even beyond that, I feel like a lot of her content is not really propping her up. I feel like she's just kind of there on the show. I feel like she doesn't really stand out in any particular way to where I feel like she's a pretty unlikely winner in that regard. But at the end of the day, she at least has an idol. I feel like there's at least a road for her to be an underdog, at least more sympathetic compared to Eileen, which was enough to have her here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, we have another player that hasn't really been on the show that much, and here we have Wina. And again, Wina has had a bit more notable moments compared to these other people, but again, he is someone who has had a largely inconsistent edit on the show. I feel like he's only being shown when it's absolutely necessary, where obviously he gets focused in episode 10, but that's because he gets votes at this tribal and because he does play his idol, which obviously he does set up by him mentioning the idol for the first time in forever, which made it pretty clear that it was going to come into play. He obviously plays the idol in a spot to where he needed it, to where he obviously probably goes home had he not played it there. But obviously that was largely due to a twist, so I don't really fault him too much for that from a gain standpoint. But again, beyond that, no content. Like, who is Wina on the show? So I feel like it's that lack of consistency with his edit that leaves him a bit lower on this list. But again, he does at least have some moments here and there. I feel like there is at least a world where he could become a bigger character in the post-merge. But realistically, I don't really see him winning the game either, so he's here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have another pretty weird player to be talking about, and here we have Raymond. And again, I find Raymond's content to be extremely weird for the most part, where on one hand, we get all this talk about how Raymond is Ferris's closest ally, and that Ferris has talked multiple times about how Raymond is the only person he can trust on this tribe. But then we don't really get much content of him being propped up. If anything, he kind of comes off as a bit of a doofus, someone that doesn't really come off well based off his actions. Where obviously in this latest episode, we saw him like trying to help Kelly find an idol, which obviously doesn't really get propped up from him at all. And obviously he does eventually vote out Kelly, even though Kelly was trying to save him when Kirby was trying to target him. So I do find that kind of a misstep, but also kind of funny from a pure gain standpoint. He also has this really bizarre confessional in episode 10 where he talks about wanting to be loyal and keeping the majority of people happy. But then for whatever reason, he takes a shot at Eileen by saying that she doesn't have much of a future after the show, which was really bizarre and kind of mean-spirited, but that's Raymond for you. And in general, I find Raymond's content to be mostly weird, and I feel like at this point, I feel like it's going to go one of two ways. He's either going to be the merge boot or he's going to be a losing finalist. Where I feel like there's enough setup based off Ferris talking about being loyal to him to where I feel like their relationship could play a major factor in the post-merge, which would obviously allow Raymond to get towards the end. But I feel like with the lack of propping up on his end and the lack of positive traits with Raymond's edit, I feel like it's not really being set up for an actual win, but I feel like there's enough setup for him to get deep into the game that I have him here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and I don't really see this person winning this season either, though I could see them having an underdog run in the post-merge, and here we have Alex. And Alex is a weird character as well, where he doesn't really get shown in episode 10, really the first episode all season that he's not really shown at all, which is interesting. But then in episode 11, he is mostly quiet, where he is once again at the bottom, and he's eventually sent over to the other tribe, which is largely a reflection of him being at the bottom. And even had it been a normal round, he very well could have been taken out there, which isn't great. And then we get to this latest episode where even though this should have been a good episode for him, with him getting out Kelly, who had been set up as his rival for a lot of the season, he still gets some negativity here, where for one, we do see Ferris like kind of leading him to find the idol, which obviously isn't great, where obviously Ferris wants Alex to find the idol as a way of putting a bigger target on his back. And then even with the actual plan, like we did see like Kirby wanting to flush Alex's idol, and while that doesn't go through by the end of it, I still think that shows that Alex is probably not in it to actually win, where from a pure gain standpoint, he's obviously been at the bottom for a lot of the pre-merge. And then from an edit standpoint, while he has been one of the bigger characters of the pre-merge, I feel like he hasn't really gotten as much propping up as he probably should have. And I feel like that's a big reason why I don't really see him as a winner contender in my eyes. But I do still feel like there's a shot that he could be like this Simon figure in the post-merge where he's able to scrape on by through playing idols and winning challenges. to where he could make it deep into the game because of that. But by the end, I do see him getting targeted and taken out because of it, which is a big reason he is here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and realistically, I think this person could be booted soon, and I feel like they're largely this high because of their presence on the show. However, I feel like they're running out of runway, and here we have Caroline. And again, I feel like there's already being set up to Caroline being taken out, where we have seen Valaria now being upset at Caroline and Kitty for taking up Yola and waging revenge against them. And I feel like considering that the merge is about to happen and we're seeing Mark potentially gaining some runway, I think that's looking pretty poorly on Caroline's front. Now again, from a pure gain standpoint, I do have to give her credit over Mark in terms of controlling the post-swap section of the game, where I feel like had they gone to another tribal, she probably does get her way in taking on Mark or potentially Rihanna. But obviously we're now seeing in this latest episode that things are stacking up against Caroline, where Rihanna has an idol, we have Mark about to reunite with Valaria, we have Valaria openly talking about taking out Caroline. And again, I feel like if I had to guess, I feel like Caroline's out in the next couple of rounds. If not the merge boot, then probably an early merge boot. So obviously that's all pretty bad on Caroline's end. But again, she's at least been on the show. She's at least been a major character to this point. But realistically, I think her time's about to run out, which is why I have her here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, we have someone who I just mentioned, and here we have Mark. And obviously Mark's in a pretty interesting spot now where, as I said, I feel like these last couple of rounds have been pretty bad for Mark, where obviously he's been at the bottom. We had him thinking for a lot of episode 11 that the middle-aged mafia was going to be a thing, only for Caroline and Kitty to be very much against him. And obviously he stayed by there being a non-elimination round. And then obviously in the latest episode, we saw him trying to get the idol only to fail. So obviously this was not a great look for Mark this week. However, I do feel like the merge will be beneficial to him, where obviously he'll reunite with Valaria. We'll have him potentially picking up some numbers like with Ferris and maybe some of those other like-minded people. And I do think Mark definitely has more room to recover in the post-merge compared to Caroline, which is a big reason why I have him above her. But realistically, at the end of the day, I still don't think he's likely to win at this point. Or even if he does win the battle against Caroline, I feel like he may just be taken out soon thereafter. For all I know, he may just be like a big character taken out in the mid-merge. I don't think Mark's edit really screams out as a winner to me at the end of the day, which is a big reason I have him here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we have a pretty interesting player to be talking about, and here we have Eden. And again, I don't really know what to make of Eden at this point. We're obviously kind of similar to some other people we talked about. His edit has not been the most consistent in the world, where obviously he was pretty invisible in episode 10. Episode 12 wasn't great either, where he doesn't even explain why he took a scroll to look for the idol there. But obviously he does get a bit of focus in episode 11, where he talks about how like he's in a good spot and that the middle-aged mafia is a thing, while he has Jaden and Mark in his back pocket. Again, I do feel like he's in a pretty solid spot in the actual game, and I feel like after the merge, he could very well adapt to that and still be in a good spot there. So I feel like from a pure gain standpoint, I actually feel pretty good about Eden at this point. And even from an edit standpoint, while I don't think he's gotten the most consistent edit in the world, I could see him having an upsurgence after the merge, where obviously he did get at least some setup to him being a big character based off his week 1. So again, I feel like that could be a factor. But again, I feel like by the end of it, I just don't see him actually pulling it out by the very, very end, which is why I have him here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, we actually have the same top 3 as last week, and it's just a matter of ordering them. By number 3, we actually have the same person at number 3 as we did last week, and here we have Kirby. And again, Kirby got more of the same in terms of her actual content. And in a lot of ways, I feel like from a pure gain standpoint, she has been winning the battle against Ferris, where obviously she has been in control of the Titans during the post-swap. And while there have been missteps, such as like episode 10 with that whole situation, and then this latest episode where she wanted to target Raymond over Eileen, even though Raymond was pretty clearly close to Kelly and completely ostracizes Kelly that way, I still think Kirby has had a lot of control during this post-swap, even more so than Ferris. However, at the end of the day, I still feel like Ferris is more so the main character in the situation. I feel like he is someone who's being set up more to win by the end of it, and I think we've seen enough of Kirby's mistakes to where I could see Ferris picking up some numbers after the merge and eventually taking a shot against her. So I feel like those are things that are really holding Kirby back for me in my eyes. But again, I feel like she has been a major character on the show, even more so than the other people, to where I had to put her here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, we have someone who I just mentioned, and here we have Ferris. And again, I feel like Ferris has been set up more to actually win the battle against Kirby by the end of it, where even though he's been on the down and out compared to Kirby, where obviously he's been losing his numbers, and obviously he has been in the minority, he's still being shown as like the main character in the situation. Now, yes, there are things you can qualm with, like the fact that he did decide to take out Kelly versus trying to work with her to take out like someone from Kirby's side. And it's obviously not great from an edit standpoint that he fell for the paranoia that Kirby was talking about, though he doesn't actually rise to the level of actually playing his idol. And yes, while I do understand from a game standpoint that this paranoia would prevent him from wanting to work with Kelly, and obviously Kelly's not the most reliable person in the world to be working with anyway, it's still not an ideal position to be in, where obviously he got rid of someone who could have worked with him moving forward. Though at the same time, I feel like with the merge coming, I feel like he could very well pick up numbers there and potentially find himself within the majority alliance. And I feel like with the way that he's been set up in the edit, I feel like he's bound to take a step forward in that regard. So I think that's a big thing holding Ferris forward in my eyes, and a big reason why I have him this high on the list. But realistically, I don't think he's actually going to win by the end either, so I have him here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Australian Survivor, Titans vs Rebels, coming into the merge, is still Valaria. And again, I feel like Valaria got all the right content this week in terms of her actual content, where obviously in episode 10, it wasn't great for her from a game standpoint, where obviously her group ended up losing a number and Charles, though at the same time she got the confessional about how she sat out the challenge and that she knows that she should be nervous. Which, while that could have been a confessional setting up her downfall here, the fact that she is ultimately saved here, but also still kind of being proven right, is at least ideal in my eyes. But really the main thing keeping her this high on the list is her stuff across the other episodes. Where obviously in episode 11, she gets to react to the Charles blind side, where obviously she talks about losing her own, but needing to stick by Kirby for the time being. And obviously her not trusting Eileen, which, considering it's Eileen, is pretty well justified. But I think another major thing is in this latest episode where she finally gets a chance to talk with Caroline and Kitty about what happened during the Viola vote. And obviously she doesn't really buy their lies. And we get the setup to this revenge story where she obviously talks about avenging Viola and wanting to make sure that Caroline and Kitty are out and that they're bad liars. And obviously that's all a pretty massive pro to Valeria's edit. I feel like she's been getting a lot of pretty unnecessary content, a lot of setup for a storyline in the future. And at the same time, she's not as overexposed compared to people like Ferris and Kirby, to where I feel like she could very well take a step forward in the future and eventually take out one of those two. So I think those are things that are really propping up Valaria, and combine that with all the stuff that we've seen from her in previous weeks, I still have her here at number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps out with the channel. I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can look forward to that. I'm about to start my coverage of Survivor 46, so you can expect weekly power rankings of that show. I'm still covering the Traitors as well. And obviously we got some more shows down the line, so you can look forward to coverage of those. I'm on Patreon now, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.